First of all, thank you, obviously, for your time, Angelina. You're now in Iraq, so what is your main aim in this visit? What are you trying to accomplish while you're out here?
Well, I came to the region about 6 months ago. I first went to Syria because I work with UNHCR, and there are 1.5 million refugees in Syria alone from Iraq. And while I was there, I went inside and met with some internally displaced people. You know, these are the people made homeless because of the war. They are refugees. And this trip is to get a better picture of the internally displaced people, and to discuss the situation with the local government, with our government, with the NGOs, and with local people, and try to understand what is happening. Because there are over 2 million internally displaced people, and there doesn't seem to be a real coherent plan to help them. And there's lots of goodwill and lots of discussion, but just a lot of talk at the moment, and a lot of pieces need to be put together. So, trying to figure out what they are.
What kind of a sense have you been able to get so far in terms of how severe the crisis is, and what actually needs to be done to help out?
Well, in my research before I came here, I looked at the numbers, and there are over 4 million people displaced, and of the 2 million internally displaced, it's estimated that 58% are under 12 years old. So it's a very high number of people in a very, very vulnerable situation, and a lot of young kids. So far, the different officials I've met with, and different local people I've met with, all have shared concerns, and very strongly, you know, they have spoken out about the humanitarian crisis, but there seems to be a block in. I'm not good at policy and fixing all this and saying what's wrong, but I do know that, for example, UNHCR needs to be more active inside Iraq.
How do you think UNHCR should be doing?
Well, I don't have the answers, but I know that this is one thing that needs to be addressed and solved, because there does need to be a real presence here to help count the people and register the people.
Do you think the global community has a responsibility to address that?
Well, I think the global community always has a responsibility to any humanitarian crisis, and I think it's in our best interest to address a humanitarian crisis on this scale, because displacement can lead to a lot of instability and aggression. We certainly don't want that. A lot of people feel it's a little calmer now. This is the time to really discuss and try to get these communities back together. But if these communities don't start coming back together properly, if we don't start really counting the people, understanding where they are, what they need, making sure the schools are being built, making sure the electricity, the water, and all these needs are being met, and also understanding that a lot of the people that will return are going to come back to houses that are occupied or destroyed and bombed out. It's going to be a big operation to understand the needs, to address it, to help people put the pieces of their life back together and return to their communities. So it's really just getting the plan together, getting the group together, and everybody actively focused on helping the refugees.
What would be the message that you would want to carry out of here back home, or even the message that you would want to get out internationally in terms of what's happening here? The refugee crisis, the consequences that could happen in the future if it's not properly addressed.
I always hate speculation on the news, so I don't want to be somebody who speculates. But I think it's clear that a displaced, unstable population is what happens in Iraq, and how Iraq settles in the years to come is going to affect the entire Middle East. And a big part of what is going to affect how it settles is how these people are returned and settled into their homes, into their community, and brought back together, and whether they can live together, and what their communities look like. So it does have broad implications.
On a personal level, why is this so important to you? You willing to come here and risk your life?
It was a very easy choice to make. I felt I had to come here because it is very difficult to get answers about especially the internally displaced people. It's as I said, even UNHCR, who I traditionally work with, they are not able to be inside at the moment, and so I was very frustrated and just getting a bunch of ideas and papers, but not knowing what's really going on. So today I'm able to talk to all different people from our government and their government and really get some answers as to what is holding up the processes to really assist these people properly.
Do you think that you, in your position, can try to push this process forward, but pressure perhaps on our government?
To put pressure on our government?
Yes, or to try to just put pressure in general, create awareness.
I certainly think creating awareness. I spoke to the officials from our government today about meeting our goal, and they still intend to reach that goal. You know, there are many different people who can be cynical, or say, well, how are they going to do it? And I will ask them, how are you going to do it? And is there some way we can help to, you know?
Okay, thank you, Angelina, for talking to us.
Pleasure.
How to reduce stress. Good morning. Today, we look at how to reduce stress. As you all know, life always has stresses. Things which are causing us stress, and living without stress is virtually impossible. So, if we have to live with stress, we may as well find out more about what it is, how we can deal with it, and so on. What is stress, then? The term was originally used in physics to describe the force exerted between two touching bodies. It was strictly a term describing a physical reaction. Then, in the 1930s, a doctor named Hans Selye, S-E-L-Y-E, first used this term to describe a human's reaction to a demand placed on it, pleasant or not. And he included in this response things like accelerated breathing, accelerated heart rate, increased blood pressure, muscle tension, and so on. Now, please notice that I said that stress can be pleasant or not. This response can also be pleasant or not, and stress can be both negative and positive. Let's take a look at positive stress. Positive stress occurs in a life situation towards which one feels positively. Things like Christmas or getting married are usually positive events, but still stressful nonetheless. Another example is that pressure in a job can give some people incentive to work and excitement, but it still is stress. Negative stress is what most of us think of when we think of stress. And negative stress occurs, logically enough, in situations towards which one feels negatively. And those examples could be test-taking, a friend's death, and so on. But here, a thing to remember is that stress in itself is not hazardous. Rather, the danger is in the individual's reaction to the stress. So psychologists have found that if we develop appropriate ways to cope with stressful situations, individuals can reduce the physiological harm which is caused by stress, or which can be caused by stress. And that's what I want to talk a bit about today. What are these appropriate ways to deal with stress? How to minimize any negative reactions? The first thing that most psychologists suggest is to learn to recognize your own stress signals. We all have different types of stress signals, but individuals should monitor themselves for stress signals so that they can focus on minimizing or acknowledging the stress before it gets out of control. And common early signs for many people include irritability, insomnia, weight loss or even weight gain, smoking, drinking, increases in small errors, all kinds of things that people get which could be an early signal of stress. You can consider ways to protect yourself when you start seeing these signs coming on. So you might decide to withdraw from a stressful situation or reward yourself with equal amounts of low-stress activity time. That's really the first important way to deal with stress appropriately. A second important way to deal with stress is to pay attention to your body's demands. Most psychologists are finding that a good exercise program, good nutrition, decreases the amount of stress, or the effect of stress on the body or in the mind. And this seems quite apparent because exercise can provide a stress-free environment away from your usual stresses, and it keeps your body busy and preoccupied with non-stressful things. Okay, the third thing to reduce stress is to make plans and act when appropriate. What is suggested is that, rather than wasting energy on worrying, an individual can direct his or her energy to plan the steps and act. And often just the planning of the action helps to reduce the stress, because it reduces the worrying. And also the results of the plans or action may serve to remove or weaken the original cause of the stress. Please notice that I just now said when appropriate, and this next suggestion has to do with that idea of when appropriate. The third suggestion was to make plans and act when appropriate, rather than just sit around and worry. But the fourth plan, or fourth idea, says to learn to accept situations which are out of your control. These two then go hand in hand. You can make plans and act when it's appropriate, but when it's not appropriate or when it's impossible, the only way is to learn to accept that some things are unchangeable and out of your hands. So, for example, if you're in traffic, lateness caused by traffic is out of your hands. There's no sense in getting really crazy about that. If you do so, it only increases your stress to waste energy trying to resist what's inevitable, or what can't be avoided. The last item that psychologists suggest is to pace your activities. By pace, I mean giving yourself some manageable task to do at a reasonable speed. That is, you go at a speed that you can handle. Break your task into manageable parts rather than try to deal with the whole task all at once. So, as an example in your lives as students, a whole term paper might feel overwhelming. But if you say to yourself, today I'm going to the library and gather resources, tomorrow I'm going to read 3 articles, and so on, you'll have broken this one large task, that's writing a term paper, down into many smaller and more manageable tasks. This will certainly reduce your stress. Okay, having said all these, I want you to remember that the problem is not in the stressful experiences themselves. We all experience stress and stressful events. The problem is in our reactions to these experiences. And each of us has our own limits for stress and our own ways of coping with stress. So long as we have our own appropriate ways, stress or stressful situations can certainly be dealt with. Okay, that's all for today's lecture. See you next week.